Thanks so much for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Meriam Ibrahim.
And I'm Charlene Aaron. Conflicting court rulings create more controversy for Obamacare. Tuesday, a federal appeals court dealt a major blow to the Affordable Care Act. But just hours later, another court issued an opposite ruling. Caitlin Burke tells us what it all means for the president's health care overhaul.
It's a decision that could potentially derail Obamacare, and millions of Americans will pay the price. When Obamacare was first pitched to low and middle-income people, the plans offered on healthcare.gov were only affordable because of subsidies. That's federal aid to help pay the premium. But the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit ruled that for 36 states, those subsidies are illegal. The healthcare law says the government can only provide subsidies for healthcare sold through the state exchanges or online marketplaces. But 36 states were unwilling or unable to set up an exchange that would have made them eligible for those subsidies. So the IRS set up a rule that allowed the federal government to pay the subsidies.
The IRS has already been relatively politicized, was trying to cover for the administration here in a law that was possibly just poorly drafted. Possibly they thought all the states really would enact these exchanges.
The D.C. court ruled that the IRS action went beyond the law, and so the federal government can't legally pay out the subsidies, which could make Obamacare policies too expensive for people who depended on that money from Washington. Meanwhile, a Virginia federal court came out with a different ruling. It said the IRS correctly interpreted the will of Congress by allowing subsidies in all 50 states. Now it appears that once again, the fate of Obamacare is likely to be in the hands of the Supreme Court.
I think there's a good chance that the Supreme Court will come to the common sense conclusion that this is another example where federal does not mean state. You can't rewrite this law just to make it say what you wish it had said.
Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
And joining us now with more is Travis Weber, director of the Family Research Council Center for Religious Liberty. Travis, we've got two conflicting rulings here. Let's begin with the D.C. Circuit Court ruling. It appears to seriously undermine Obamacare. How significant is that ruling?
Absolutely. I think it does significantly undermine Obamacare. You know, at issue was one little phrase established by a state. And the court looked at that and said, we can't interpret state to mean anything else in this case. Courts do look at legislative history and circumstances surrounding the drafting of legislation, but that's only to supplement the text of the statute. And here, it's just clear enough. It can mean nothing other but a state.
Well, Travis, we know the Supreme Court has already jumped through some pretty big hoops to declare Obamacare is legal. So even if these rulings end up at the high court, will it really matter?
Well, it will matter. You know, from a legal perspective, the issues are different, and the court will be obviously taking a look at those legal issues. Now, there may be some political and a general philosophical sense surrounding this whole fight and the framing of the fight in which the court may want to uphold the law and achieve a result similar to its last big ruling on Obamacare when the individual mandate was challenged. However, the court will be looking at the legal issues, and so I think there's good reason to believe that the court will agree that the text of the law and the meaning of the word state can't really mean anything else.
Well, today there have now been some major rulings against Obamacare, like the Hobby Lobby ruling. But are they about the law itself, or are they about the way the Obama administration has been implementing it?
Well, I think I would probably answer that with it's about both. Certainly there are a lot of problems with the implementation of the law. The fact that there are those problems is compounded by the size and scope and what the law is attempting to do, which is rather novel, in its effects and intrusion into so many areas of American life. I think many will accuse the courts of simply enacting their political will in the decisions. I think, however, we've seen a lot of fair decisions in which the law is examined, and though the administration would want us to believe otherwise, this is simply a matter of upholding the rule of law.
Does Obamacare threaten religious liberty in any way?
Well, I think it absolutely does, not so much in this decision, but in some of the other decisions we've seen in the Hobby Lobby decision and elsewhere. Next up, we're going to have some of these cases involving nonprofit challenges, nonprofit entities challenging the so-called accommodation under the law. And, this, again, is an effect of Obamacare, and it's one in which the administration wishes to enforce its view of religion on individuals. And, this is something we're going to have to continue to watch.
Well, in the wake of the Hobby Lobby ruling, some in Congress are trying to actually rewrite the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. How dangerous is that?
Well, it's very dangerous. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act is a strong resetting in statute of a constitutional standard of free exercise of religion. One would not think that's a controversial idea, yet now you have folks in Congress attempting to modify that and suppress those rights and gut that act, basically, in order to advance and force folks to pay for other methods of contraception that many believe end life.
All right, Travis Weber, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Secretary of State John Kerry landed at Ben Gurion Airport on Wednesday despite the decision of U.S. and European carriers to cancel flights to and from Tel Aviv. Israel opened a former military airport in the north to accommodate international flights. Meanwhile, as the war in Gaza continues, some fear a new uprising on Palestinians there. George Thomas and Chris Mitchell are in the region with the full report.
The FAA banned flights to Israel after a Hamas rocket made a direct hit on a home in a town next to Israel's Ben Gurion Airport. This follows heightened concerns after the Malaysian airliner was shot down over Ukraine. This is the arrivals hall at Ben Gurion Airport. Usually there's hundreds of people here waiting for family or friends, but now it's nearly deserted. The last time this many flights were canceled because of war was back in 1991 during the first Gulf War.
Right now we've got a lot of passengers stuck abroad with American Airlines and European Airlines. I think as a solidarity you should come here. There is no reason to give up to the Hamas and close the Israeli airport.
Transportation Minister Yaakov Katz said there's no reason to stop flights to and from Ben Gurion because it's a secure airport. Thousands of passengers were stranded overnight at Israel's Ben Gurion Airport and elsewhere on their way to Israel. David Maimon, president of Israel's national airline, El Al, says they'll do what they can to pick up the slack.
Increase the frequency of the flights, and we do everything that we can do to bring the passengers back to home.
Meanwhile, the international community is scrambling to get a ceasefire, but the battle continues. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed overnight in Gaza. Israel struck some 200 targets in 24 hours, including 100 in the Hamas stronghold of Sajaya.
We are striking Hamas in its rocket capabilities, its tunnel capabilities. We've exposed over 23 tunnels.
Still, Hamas continued to fire rockets at Israel on Wednesday. The IDF also released these maps showing how Hamas is entrenched in civilian areas as the death toll climbed above 600. They released this footage showing 2 terrorists escaping in an ambulance. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on Tuesday condemned the use of civilians as human shields, but urged the 2 sides to reconcile.
Stop fighting, start talking, and take on the root causes of the conflict so we are not back to the same situation in another 6 months or a year.
What grievance can we solve for Hamas? Their grievance is that we exist. They don't even want a 2-state solution. They don't want any state solutions.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Ben Gurion Airport, Tel Aviv.
This is George Thomas in Bethlehem. 46 miles away from Israel's offensive against Hamas in Gaza. There's another battle some say is being dangerously ignored by the world.
But my big concern right now is that the West Bank is being neglected. With the riots are being done every single night, almost now 13, 14 nights in a row. Focused on Gaza.
Stephen Khoury, a prominent Christian Arab who lives in Bethlehem, worries the area is ripe for another uprising.
I was born in Jerusalem. I grew up in Bethlehem. I remember how the first and second intifada started, and I'm seeing in this an evidence of a possible another outbreak of an intifada happening in the West Bank.
Here on the streets, Palestinian protesters, angry about Israel's war on Hamas, are running daily skirmishes with Israeli soldiers and Palestinian Authority police. Several people have been killed and injured.
This is a security wall that divides Israel and the West Bank.
for nearly 2 weeks. There have been violent protests taking place right here on the street, as well as in other West Bank cities such as Hebron, Nablus, and Ramallah. Neither Israel nor the Palestinian Authority want to see another front of the war open in the West Bank.
We are delighted to have
Colonel Peter Lerner is Israel Defense Forces spokesman.
We need to try and keep it calm and keep it controlled. It might not be possible.
To avoid further violence, Khoury, who helps lead a prominent church in Bethlehem, is calling on his people to de-escalate the tensions.
In Ecclesiastes, it says there's a time to mourn, a time to laugh, and a time to dance. This is a time, I believe, for neither three. This is a time where we need to be people, are peacemakers. We need to be a voice, a balanced, a righteous voice in the midst of a wilderness.
For several weeks now, his church has been distributing copies of the New Testament and bottles of water wrapped with the scripture verse, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God."
We need to preach love, forgiveness, acceptance. We need to preach the message of do not fight, do not be overcome evil with evil, but overcome evil with good.
In the meantime, the U.S. State Department is warning Americans to avoid travel to Bethlehem and other cities in the West Bank because of ongoing hostilities in the region. George Thomas, CBN News, Bethlehem.
Muslim militants stole nearly everything from the Iraqi Christians they've threatened to kill. Hundreds of Christians have been fleeing from Iraq's second largest city, Mosul. Last week, the so-called Islamic State told Christians to either convert to Islam, pay a protection tax, or die. Those who fled had to leave most of their belongings behind. Then gunmen from the Islamic State stopped them at checkpoints and stole much of what they did manage to take along. Virginia Congressman Frank Wolf told Congress Tuesday Christians in Iraq are facing a genocide.
The U.S. Congress is set to hold a hearing on why Meriam Ibrahim is still stuck in Sudan. New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith will hold a chair a meeting today. He says there are renewed efforts to put the Christian mother of two back in prison. Ibrahim had been sentenced to death for marrying a Christian and abandoning the Muslim faith. A judge dropped the sentence after an international outcry, but she hasn't been able to leave the country yet. She and her family are now in the U.S. Embassy in Khartoum, where they await permission to fly to the U.S. Her husband is an American citizen.
The bodies of some of those killed in the Malaysia Airlines crash left the embattled region of eastern Ukraine today aboard 2 military aircraft. This brings some consolation to grieving families who must now wait for positive identifications and for answers about who caused the disaster. Most of the 298 people aboard Flight 17 were Dutch citizens, and its government has declared a day of national mourning as the bodies begin to arrive.
Coming up, another front in the immigration war. Why are healthy, middle-class women from Latin America coming to the U.S. to give birth?
A Christian outreach to children in Portland, Oregon is being met with opposition. The Child Evangelism Fellowship is hosting evangelism and discipleship camps throughout the city this week for children between the ages of 5 and 12. Opponents took out a full newspaper ad to protest the outreach. They say the group presents a fundamentalist view of Christianity that should be rejected. CEF's vice president says the opposition is part of an atheist plan to dismantle Christian outreach. A 2012 Gallup poll indicates Oregon is among the least religious states in the entire country.
The crisis on our southern border has many searching for reasons why thousands of immigrants are seeking to live here in the U.S. Many blame poverty and crime in Latin America, but that isn't the only reason. Chuck Holton is in Panama, where he found it isn't just the poor who are coming to America.
Panama has the highest per capita income of any country in Central America. It's also the farthest from the U.S. southern border. But people from here are heading to the United States as well. Only it isn't the kind of people you might think. Sarah is a well-educated business owner here in Panama. She asked that we not show her face.
I have 2 businesses. I have the bar, and the internet cafe.
The businesses are profitable, but when Sarah became pregnant with her first child, her friends told her she should go to the U.S. to have her baby.
My friend told me that we could go to United States to have our babies so they could have the United States citizenship.
Her friend wasn't suggesting they enter illegally. Both of them were able to show sufficient income to get a tourist visa. That meant they would be able to fly right to California, where they could then wait to give birth. Her friend had done it once before.
She was really afraid because her belly was a little big, but they didn't ask anything and they allowed her to enter like normal tourists.
As a bonus, her friend was able to have her baby at a hospital in Los Angeles and pay nothing for the birth. The bill was picked up by U.S. taxpayers.
She didn't pay anything. She only paid the stay, the rent in the house that she was staying, and the food, and that's the only thing that she paid.
And this isn't an isolated case. Some Southern California hospitals report that 99% of new mothers they serve are illegal immigrants. What's more, some American hospitals are advertising their maternity services in Latin America.
Yeah, it's very common. I know like 5 or 6 people that go there and already have their babies there, and they're planning to have more babies there.
Ultimately, Sarah decided to stay here in Panama and have her baby because she was afraid she'd be too lonely spending several months in the U.S. But almost 340,000 women every year come to the United States to give birth. And that's a big problem because when they hit 21, they can bring their families up with them.
My friends wanted their babies to be Americans because it's going to be easier for them to get a job, to go to college, and to enter to the country later when they grow up.
From Panama, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Up next, a movement to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. So why is the government making it difficult? Find out after this. For years, American businesses have been moving overseas. Well, now many of them want to come back, but something is standing in their way.
And as Caitlin Burke reports, U.S. government regulations could slow down or even stop the return of Made in America.
Across the country, hundreds of companies are helping reverse a long trend of sending American manufacturing jobs overseas. They're doing what's known as reshoring. That's bringing production back home to cities across the U.S. instead of chasing cheap labor and other incentives in developing nations. Over the last 4 years, about 100,000 jobs have returned to the U.S. That's according to the Reshoring Initiative, a nonprofit group based in Chicago. Many factors contribute to the U.S. regaining a competitive edge over countries like India, Japan, and China.
Chinese wages have been rising, expressed in U.S. dollars, at 15 to 18% per year for the last 15 years. Whereas in the U.S., it's stayed stationary.
Other reasons include delivery time, quality, and innovation.
Turns out you can't innovate the product very well if you don't manufacture the product.
Chesapeake Bay Candle Company opened its first domestic manufacturing facility in 2011.
We created over 80 jobs in the last 3 years.
Owner and CEO Mei Shi started the company back in 1994 in her Maryland basement.
We were so impatient waiting for molds to fill our candles with. We saw a lot of soup cans lying around the kitchen. We say, wow, these are great molds. So we just used them. The first set of samples were made with those molds.
Despite its U.S. origins, May opened her first factory overseas because of cheaper labor cost.
If you have a mold, you first finish it by pouring wax in it, and then you have to manipulate the texture so that it achieves a desired result. So each candle would be priced at $40 or $50, and it's not really going to be the market that can accept that.
The company grew quickly for about 10 years, until the 2005 recession blew in.
Consumers stopped purchasing as they used to in 2005 or before that. So our retail partners demanded price reduction.
That change caused May to reevaluate her decision to do business from China. In the end, it made sense to bring a big part of her company's manufacturing back home. Reshoring, however, can be risky, and many attempts are unsuccessful. Some experts blame those results on the U.S. government.
On the one hand, there's the reshoring initiative, which is, like we've been talking about, this push to bring high-paying manufacturing jobs and activities back to the United States. At the same time, the U.S. government, since probably about 2008, has gotten really serious about enforcing
U.S. regulations governing exports and international conduct. People are being encouraged to bring their manufacturing back here, but they don't realize that the costs of complying with these kinds of regulations and managing the risks of them can be quite substantial. So they work across purposes.
The opening of the Chesapeake Bay Candle Glen Burnie facility was delayed for 6 months because of the process of getting a permit.
They look at us as if we are a little bit crazy, but they say, we haven't given a license in 2 decades, but we think if you look at hospital code, school code, and a restaurant code, you're safe.
During the entire delay, they still had to pay for the facility and key staff members, although the doors remained closed. Eventually, the permits came through, and the Chesapeake Bay Candle Company became one of the success stories.
If we have not moved the manufacturing back, we wouldn't be growing like we were growing.
About 50% of the company's business currently comes from here in their Glen Burnie factory. But after adding a new production line, they have the capacity to triple that number in the future.
Word has been out that we have moved back. We have people knocking on our doors to say, can you produce for us? There are so many companies that we wouldn't dream of, giving us an order easily because they require made in USA.
And May has a message to the government as they encourage more companies to come home.
Do not become a business prevention if you are trying to be a business creation.
Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Glen Burnie, Maryland.
Finally today, CBN is working with an international web-based ministry called Jesus.net to spread the gospel in India.
It has partnered with a local website with both an English and Hindi version. They share about the love of Jesus and provide a prayer of salvation for people who want to accept Christ. In the last 2 months, more than 22,000 people have accessed both sites, and 80% have come through a mobile device. So far, more than 1,900 people have accepted Christ through this internet evangelism network.
And I say let's log on to Jesus.net.
You got it.
Right now.
That's right. Get on it.
That's going to do it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
We want to know what you think about the stories you've seen here. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. You can join us again right here next time. Make it a wonderful Wednesday, everybody.